us with our opening karakia for today. Tūtaua mai I runga, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I waho, tūtaua mai I roto. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora ki te katoa, homie, huie, tai kie. Tēnā koutou katoa, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today for this webinar. Ko Kimberley aho, kei te Sustainable Business Network aho e mahi ana I te Ropu Climate Action. I'm Kimberley Savill. I work in the Climate Action team here at the Sustainable Business Network. And I'm very excited to have with us today a fantastic panel coming to us live from COP28 and all of you wonderful people in the audience here to listen and bring your questions. So this session really belongs to our panelists. I will be helping things along by monitoring your questions in the Q&A. Please do make use of that. If you're not familiar with Zoom, you can just go to the bottom of the screen and you'll see a little speech bubble picture with a Q&A. If you click and open that up, you'll be able to enter your questions and I'll be monitoring to make sure I can pass those through to our panelists. We've also had some fantastic topics and questions submitted on sign up. Thank you so much to everybody who's shared that. We'll do our best to get across the really wide range of things you've all told us that you're interested in. So I'm going to let our panel introduce themselves primarily, but with us today we have Rod Oram, who's a journalist with Newsroom. You may have been following his daily dispatches from COP28, which I've been finding fascinating. We have Laura Gemmell, CEO of Eco Choice Aotearoa, who's also been doing a little bit of reporting back from COP. And we have Monica Mireles Serrano, Head of Sustainability, Global Engagement and Markets, with Zespri, who's arrived very recently at COP and can provide us the freshest take on how it's feeling on the ground. So it's fantastic to have the three of you with us. And I'm going to invite you each to just do a few minutes of introduction to yourself, your presence at COP, what's brought you there, and some of your headline impressions so far before we dive into a Q&A. So Laura, can I invite you to start?
Sure, Kimberley, thank you. Kia ora, ko Laura Gemmell, toka whenua, and as Kimberley said, I am the Chief Executive of the country's official eco-label, Eco Choice Aotearoa, previously known as Environmental Choice New Zealand. We rebranded earlier this year. So I am here to understand or meet with some of the other eco labels and understand where we're coming at from standards. So obviously there's a proliferation of standards. So looking for some cohesion, and we've certainly got that. There's been ISO and the financial standards teams working together, which has been really great, but also to understand some of the opportunities and hurdles that the business community might be facing.
Fabulous. Thank you, Laura. I've just been informed my internet connection is unstable. So if I disappear at any point, please chat amongst yourselves and I'll be back with you as soon as I can. Fabulous to have that introduction. Monica, I think we'll go to you next.
Kia ora, team. I'm Monica. I am Head of Sustainability at Zespri for Engagement and Markets. So I lead a team of international people that are sitting in our key regions, so Europe, China, and APAC. And we are in charge of making sure that our sustainability strategy is implemented all the way when it reaches our consumers. And on the engagement part, I deal with all the communications. I am the representative with our membership organization, including SBN. And I'm here at COP because we recently launched our innovation fund. So you can see in my background. It has been like my baby. I have been working on it for the past 6 months. And it's an effort to consolidate our investment into solutions that will help us accelerate where we are. We know that we have a big ambition when it comes to sustainability, and we know that we cannot do it alone. So we really need to expand our ecosystem of the people that we know that have solutions to a more broader range. And the reasons for us to be at a COP was first to bring the voice of the fresh produce. So there's not that many companies that are in the fresh sector. And this is the first time that Zespri is attending. I was very happy to see that the reaction that people have, like people actually do know us and they are our consumers, are actually the negotiators, the NGOs, journalists. So it's great to be there. And then they are like, oh, so what are you interested in, and what are you here? So it is about that. It's extending our network of solution providers. It's helping understand what is triggering to the consumers and what is the communications language that we should be using. So my highlight so far has been a session that I attended yesterday in the Storytelling Pavilion, which was a standing committee on climate. And I got a lot of what we should be telling then our consumers if we want to bring this change. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou te whānau. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. This is my third COP, although I had been watching them from afar before that. And the predominant thing that I'm picking up here is there is an intense clarity over what has to be done. And there is I was about to use the word burning ambition, but that seems singularly inappropriate. There's this fierce ambition to land net zero, a phase out of fossil fuels. Crucially, this all hinges around the global stocktake on countries' climate commitments and progress to date. And I'll come back to the GST, as it's called here, in due course. It's also by far the biggest COP. The previous two in Glasgow and then Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt were about 40,000 and 45,000, and we passed the 100,000 mark in terms of official delegates. And that's not all the public that's coming through the green zone. That's just in the blue zone, which is the epicenter of negotiations. So that sounds an impossible number to make work, but I think it does work because, as I say, we're getting this intense clarity and fierce ambition here, which feels very different from the past two COPs.
Amazing. Thank you, Rod. I think that's a great jumping off point for one of the first questions that we had come in advance here. And I want to encourage everybody at this point to open up that Q&A and start submitting your live questions as well. So fabulous to hear about that intense ambition and determination. Following from afar, we've definitely been seeing a lot about the fossil fuel phase-out conversation and the controversy over oil representation and question marks over some of the role that may be coming through in negotiations, which feels in stark contrast to what you just described. So how, starting with you, Rod, do you think that conversation on the phase-out is going in practice, and what do you see coming through from that?
Let me just describe briefly the key driver of all this, and this is the global stocktake. This was mandated by the Paris Agreement in 2015, and this is the first global stocktake. And so, as I say, it's assessing each country's commitments to date, how they're delivering on them, and what the trajectory of that is. And this is a precursor to them having to deliver their next NDCs, their next commitments in 2025. So when you look at the global stocktake, you realize how adrift the world is on all this, and the UN has been very clear on that in its pre-COP reports. So that gives momentum. Then the second thing is the only way that the people of the world can meet these commitments and meet these climate challenges is a very rapid phase out of fossil fuels. That's, all the science tells you that, all the economic analysis by people like International Energy Agency and the rest tell us that, and that's indisputable. So that's what I think is giving the real urgency here. And it's completely extraordinary because it was only in Glasgow 2 years ago that the word fossil fuels ever got into the final agreement. And that was for a very watered down thing on the phase down of coal. Some 100 countries last year in Egypt tried to get fossil fuels into the final agreement and got nowhere. But this year it is in the draft text, two forms of how that might work. And there is more than 100 countries declaring that this is absolute key goal, including the United States, which is the world's largest producer of oil and gas as a nation. And so that's what's really focusing the discussions here. Then you get into the fascinating issue is is there any chance of this being hosted as we are by the UAE, which is a petro-state, and a president of COP, i.e. the chair, Sultan Al Jaber, who is chief executive of the state-owned oil company, ADNOC. And indeed, he was deeply embarrassed, I think, and compromised by the release, fabulous story from The Guardian earlier in the week, of video and a story accompanying it of an exchange between him and Mary Robinson, a previous president of Ireland, where he was saying that, you know, there's no way to have sustainable development without fossil fuels. If you tried that, we'd be back in caves. You know, there's no science to tell us that we have to phase out on fossil fuels to get to 1.5. And of course, people jumped on him from a great height there. I hope he was quite chastened by that. It's a very, very big issue, though, of how you would ever get petro-states to sign up to this. And I won't exercise all the stages in this other than refer you to my story on Newsroom today, where I analysed what a pathway might look like and why there might be a way that petro-states, crucially Saudi Arabia, who say they're fiercely opposed to all this, might come around. So that's what makes this second week of COP starting tomorrow, where we have the political negotiations. This first week was officials from governments working out the agenda, draft texts, and all the rest. The real work starts, sorry, that is very real work, but the intensely political work starts tomorrow and runs theoretically for a week until Tuesday the 12th, although as in past COPs, it'll surely run on. So that is really the central issue. And other fabulous issues that are on the COP agenda at a high level, prominent level for the first time, particularly, for example, nature in general, but then particularly land use change, agriculture and food, haven't been, there's lots of programs going on about that, but it's not reflected in the draft agreement of the final text. So crucially, in the second draft, there was no mention of nature at all. And various countries clamored for a late third draft. And I hadn't seen yet this morning whether one came out late yesterday or early this morning, that finally includes nature. So if this COP finds itself obsessed in terms of the agreement that's shaping up by fossil fuels, and we get somewhere on that, that's hugely important. Not in no way to diminish the other subjects. Just one last point about why this is so pivotal. When countries make their NDCs, they're either for 5 or 10 years, and a number of countries are 10 years. So in 2025, they'll be making NDCs that run out to 2035, which will include goals and policies which will run on, you know, well past 2040. So that's why the fossil fuel phase out has to be agreed at this COP, because it dramatically influences the NDCs and that long tail, that long trajectory of progress and policy after that. It just cannot work to say, oh, well, we didn't quite do it this year, we'll do it next year, because that trigger is completely lost. And it would still have an influence, but it would lack the impact that making the decisions is this week.
Thank you. That's a fabulous and comprehensive feeling answer to ground us all in the stakes of this and the importance of that agreement. I want to come across now, Laura and then Monica, to how this is looking from perhaps more of the business side and outside of those negotiations. Laura, could you perhaps provide us with a little bit of context on that sort of other side of COP that I know you've been paying some attention to, and then maybe what your key takeaway there has been, whether it's related at all to this fossil fuel conversation or not, and then we'll come over to you, Monica, on some of that sort of food and nature side.
Sure. I think it's just one other thing I'd say on the phase down versus phase out debate. I heard a really great quote yesterday that I was quite keen to share. And it was, you know, what we build now, we will use later. And I think that was kind of a bit of a gut punch for me from New Zealand, given our the government's signalling that they're looking to resume oil and gas exploration. So that was just something else that I thought I'd share. From a business perspective, I think the thing that I have been really heartened by has been, and I don't say that lightly because I'm probably one of the ones who have approached this with a degree of irony. But there is genuine wish to collaborate and some really amazing work happening. I think, Rod was speaking about how many people are here, and it's easy to kind of, I think, roll your eyes a little bit and go, oh, good God, what a circus. But I think the people here do have a really important role to play. So there's businesses looking to collaborate for impact. There's obviously your policymakers who are working hard on the negotiations. And I'd make a real point of saying, there's obviously, we have our external representation in terms of New Zealand, but the negotiating team is really quite phenomenal. That's something that has struck me, led by our climate change ambassador, Kay Harrison. She's got this team of quite young, incredible Kiwis who are super intelligent. A lot of them are Wahine Maori, which is great to see as well. But we sort of... they're still being sort of picked and are co-facilitating a lot of these sessions because we still have that reputation as being really principled and fair. And I think that's something we can all be really proud of, despite being named Fossil of the Day on the first day of COP, which is obviously a fairly dubious honour. I think one of the other things that has really stood out for me is, there's been a lot of talk around financing. It all comes down to money. And everyone was very excited on the first day about the announcement of the Loss and Damage Fund. I kind of show me the money before I get excited. And not only that, I want to see it sort of distributed to the places that need it most. And we know from the World Risk Report that Solomon Islands, Vanuatu and Kiribati are most in need. And I don't believe that they're getting... COP has talked about this being the most inclusive conference ever. And you could say, oh, there's 100,000 people, very inclusive. But getting an invite and getting the floor are two very different things. And, for me, when King Charles opened at the summit, you can't decry the fact that he cares deeply about the environment. But it would have been great to hear from someone who is on the front line right now. And I think we've seen some incredible youth delegates as well who've spoken very clearly about that. So yes, that's great news. I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer, but we have a history of not following through on our commitments. So that's something that I definitely have watched with interest. And the last thing I would say is probably, gosh, there's been so much talk about technology and how it's going to save us. It's really frustrating, I have to say, because yes, it's a tool in the toolbox, but I also think it's a bit of a distraction. We know what we need to do. We need to cut emissions. We need to lean into nature-based solutions, and we really need to harness some of the amazing Indigenous and community knowledge that we've got. Quite simple solutions. And again, these conversations are happening inside events, and I don't feel that they are being taken as seriously as the shiny new things. So look, it kind of looks like a trade fair from a business point of view in some areas. There's a Formula E car on display and things like that. There's even a stand for sustainable policing, which I haven't quite got my head around yet. So there's a wonderful array of things to look and see. But I think some of them can be a little bit of a distraction. We need to get down to business.
Do you want to jump in there, Monica?
Yeah, I can take it from there. I think for business, the main thing that we have been always talking about, like when I was not in Zespri, which was my favorite employer in the other COPs since I think it's before Paris, was the clarity. We need the right signals from governments to tell us what is it that they are going to back off so we can put our investments against them, whether you are a renewable company, energy, or a circular economy, or whether you are investing in your agri-systems. So we always want to know, what is the clear direction so we can make decisions around there. What is, for me, important to the size of the COP is precisely that there is so many actors now talking. And in the past, you will go to some side event and they will be people talking about technology, and they will be, you know, like Microsoft and Google and others. So there will be like very kind of silo. So there will be then another event where there will be like youth, and there will be only young people talking about the young people and only women talking about women. It felt very silo. Whereas this time I feel that a lot of the events where I have been, they have been really thought about the whole ecosystem and the whole supply chain. I have been to one of the events where it was with shipping. That is one of our most important topics from an exporter perspective. And it included then the shippers, the ports, the operators, and then the regulators. So I think that's kind of thinking to look at every single actor in the supply chains makes a difference. It brings a different perspective to what are you talking about. And for me, is that one of the positives of having this size of COP. On the kind of shocking things that I heard yesterday was about how businesses can or are starting to double think their investments due to the backlash that they are facing by media. And that actually really struck me because, you know, we have to do the doing. And then when we are trying to be ambitious and have these goals, and of course you're going to face challenges. But I think there is this trend that, you know, we don't want to do greenwashing. And then if you happen to do it, that you are getting a lot of bad publicity. And one of the Nordic companies said, you know, like we had been investing in forests for a long time. And then we see all these articles being published in The Guardian, and then we don't want that. You know, our comms team don't want that. Our shareholders don't want that. So we pull back. And I was like, so what is happening to this investment? And it's like, oh, well, it's just going back to shareholders because, you know, we don't want to do that. So I think this is, for me, a very risky area to be in, and something we should like not take it slightly, because I think we of course, we don't want to be doing greenwashing and we want to prevent it as much as we can. But I think it's important that we give this space and the benefit of the doubt in order to not create inaction.
I think that just on that, though, I think, you know, one of the criticisms has been that businesses have looked at things like planting trees and have not made real operational changes. I think that's the crux of things, right? So it can't be a instead of, and I think that's where a lot of the criticism comes from. And I think, you know, we do have some incredible businesses in New Zealand who are doing both. You know, they're working towards real operational changes, but looking to see what else they can do. So there has been a lot of talk around carbon credits and that market, no solutions. And I think, yeah, I think that's kind of where some of that comes from. And the other thing I would say is, you know, waiting for governments to show us the light or to provide signals. I think we all need to just get on with what we do and find better ways of doing it.
Thank you both. I think that's a fantastic point, both around the need to make sure that you're taking that real action and the role of business in the doing. We have a question from the audience that I think it puts an interesting angle on this as well, directed to you, Rod, asking, can you give a journalist's view of the value of global business attendance at COP? Are they directly influencing governments and outcome agreements? As you noted, having 100,000 people is more than double. Do those non-state participants just create more noise and distraction? Clearly, from the answers of our panel so far, there's a lot more going on than noise and distraction. But is there that influence happening on those negotiations, do you think?
It's very hard to judge, and I would point to a couple of things, though. First of all, if you are chief executive of a very major global business, you probably have some access to senior political leaders. But if you don't have that kind of ranking, you're not going to really get far beyond your own delegation. So I think there are limits to that. But also there is a high degree of sophisticated filtering or response to companies' please or politicking. A very interesting example was Darren Woods, the chief executive of ExxonMobil, has turned up here. This is his first ever COP. And the comments he's made, particularly in an interview with the Financial Times, were quite extraordinary about how there'd been too much emphasis on renewable energy and there was a real role for oil and gas in the transition, all this kind of stuff. And he was very roundly criticized. He did himself no favors. I mean, he quite simply had come to the wrong party. And I think he embarrassed himself. But in doing that, he also very clearly revealed what we all know, but he said it for us, of where the oil and gas sector is, by and large. So there is influence. One of the things that worries me, though, is that I've also seen some backlash from business people who say, look, this was just not worth it. You know, I queued for 2 hours to get my badge. And when I got in, it was terribly hot. I couldn't, find the people I wanted. It's a complete waste of time. And so I'm a bit worried that this might be peak COP in one sense, that nobody will ever try to do one as big as this again. And there is, for some years, there's been a big push within the kind of the COP community to separate out this. So you go back to annual political negotiations, and you could perhaps have them at the UNFCCC headquarters in Bonn every year, for example. And then there'll be some kind of trade show, climate trade show every year or two. And I think would be a huge mistake, because I think it's when politicians and negotiators walk through COP and even just peripherally see that, and it's a term I started using last year, this hui of humanity here, all intensely focused on these climate issues, and that they realize they're not negotiating in a vacuum. It's not some kind of, bloodless diplomatic negotiation. That we're talking about the future of humanity, the future of the planet, and everybody's a stakeholder. So I would hold on, personally, I would hold on very fiercely to this idea that COP should embrace all of those people, in fact, even bring more, but just find better ways to use them. Sorry, that's a long discursive way from the narrow question about business, but I think it's really important to think of things in that broader context.
And maybe jump on that point. I think it is important that, civil society still gets the space. And because the level of change we want to achieve, of course, we need to get rid of fossil fuels, but it's every one of us can have actually an immense impact in how we live. And some of us, like we might already be vegetarian or vegan, but there's some steps that we haven't taken that have an incredible power. So, writing to our banks to say, please also invest in fossil fuel. I'm going to move my money to somewhere else, my pension funds. I think some of these little steps needs to be happening and needs to be communicated to the wider public. And somehow COP gives this arena for everybody. So I'm a very big fan of the open COP, whether it's, whether you keep it at a smaller size and do more side events. But I think it's really important that we continue to communicate and do, because actually, people are asking for the space. I mean, there's so many young people now at COP, and they are, you see everybody walking around with a selfie stick, broadcasting to their communities what is happening. And that I find very powerful.
I totally agree as well. As I was saying before, I think with the circus, I think everyone does have a place, though. You've got journalists and activists and NGOs holding the decision makers to account as well, the businesses looking to collaborate, all of those sorts of things. I think it's super valuable, as much as we might giggle and roll our eyes a little bit. But I think it's also, and Rod, you just mentioned this, is it's a great reminder to our decision makers. There have been a couple of very tightly watched protests inside, very peaceful, mostly music. But I also think there was a young woman from Kiribati that I met who was on a youth panel, and she was absolutely phenomenal. Her name was Isabel. She's only 21, and she started seeing the impacts of climate change at 12. She realized, she remembered them quite starkly. Her home was inundated with a king tide. It went through their water system. They did not have water for 3 months. They had nothing to drink or bathe in or cook with. And she went, she's very worried that they're going to become climate refugees. And she spoke about this. She's studying environmental management in Fiji with the idea of going back to Kiribati and seeing what she can do to help. But she also has self-started her own project where she is engaging with other youth in various communities to scale up Indigenous knowledge that has been unfortunately lost in some areas and team it with, modern technology as well. So it's that sort of using both things, and it's such a brilliant approach. But she mentioned to me that she went to a UN event on climate migration, and she asked a question about Kiribati because I don't think that they have seen very much of any of the funding that has been kicking around internationally. And the UN delegate said to her, "Don't worry about climate migration. You can take your artifacts with you." So, I think the fact that there are people within the UN and people at COP who think that's okay is a good reminder that we need people like Isabel. We need, we need these youth delegates. We need representation from different groups to sort of shake their fist and go, "That's not good enough. Our land is our culture." And how would you feel if you had to just pack up sticks and move to somewhere completely different? So yeah, that's again probably one of the big moments that has stuck with me during this thing.
As I walk around COP, I'm hugely relieved because I'm possibly in the oldest 10% of the delegates, possibly even the oldest 5%. And I just have this huge sense of relief that there's all these younger people who are far more energetic, far more creative in their thinking, and even far more determined than I am. So that's a great relief. But also notably, the UAE delegation to COP, both the delegation here, but also the preparatory team. The UAE was very proud of what a high proportion of women and younger people were in that. And indeed, they have a very impressive Minister for the Environment here in the UAE. That's true, but I still wonder how patriarchal the UAE still is. And for me, a little glimpse about that was to watch that extraordinary 7-minute clip on The Guardian, do look at it, of Al Jaber and Mary Robinson. And it just felt like a very patronizing male lecturing a very distinguished former President of Ireland, former United Nations Commissioner for Refugees, and one of the elders, as they're called. And that's the UAE, which is obviously widely considered one of the more broad-minded of the Emirates, Dubai itself, and then the UAE generally in the Gulf. So that culture stuff is still very strong.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's really important, I think, to understand some of those cultural influences and the huge role that just having this hui of humanity on the ground is playing. And thank you for that fabulous story, Laura. We have a couple of questions on a related topic around the role that Aotearoa New Zealand is playing at COP and how that's being responded to. So I wonder if maybe we'll start with you, Rod, on kind of how New Zealand's performance has been compared to other countries in terms of commitments that have been made and what New Zealand is accomplishing. I know, Laura, you've given us some fabulous perspective on the role in negotiations. And then perhaps to everybody, whether as part of the New Zealand contingent, you're seeing any particular reactions or pushback after that Fossil of the Day award that we picked up recently. So starting with you, Rod, on the achievements so far.
I will start with a plausible explanation, which is with transitioning governments. The new government is still trying to work out where it's sitting and what it's doing. But it has been very frustrating because it's been impossible to get from MFAT either here or out of Wellington definitive and speedy responses as to which things we've signed up to. I think some of them are still to be decided because it needs to be decided by the new government, which is completely fair enough. But having said that, this government coming in has been very clear that it sees a different role for New Zealand. This was just a kind of a by the way comment from, I think it was Luxon, my apologies if I haven't got this right, but it was at that political level, that the past government was very big on big statements and, making grand gestures out to the world, but this government is going to revert back to how it was last time it was in government, the key government, of just being focused on doing some particular things that were meaningful for New Zealand. And so that will be a big change, bearing in mind that the one significant contribution the key government made was 2009 at Copenhagen, disastrous COP because there wasn't a final agreement. But New Zealand put the idea on the table of creating an agricultural greenhouse gas research consortium around the world, which is up and running, is doing really good work. And we've got our own branch of that in New Zealand, working internationally. So that was a very good idea. However, I feel that our very wonderful delegation here, civil service delegation, who are indeed very talented, very committed. I think they're also very small. I think there's possibly less than 10 of them. And indeed, Kay Harrison is a very, very skilled ambassador chief negotiator, and she's been co-chairing one of the working parties on mitigation. All that's fine, but we have an astonishingly low profile. And so where the Australian Pavilion is, in the same building, we're just around the corner where the Moana Pacific Pavilion is. That's a grand word for a space in what looks like an office building. Then New Zealand is helping, government is helping to fund that Moana Pacific Pavilion. And there's a very rich program there. It's a very lively place. But the delegation offices for New Zealand are down a little alleyway alongside and up on the first floor and completely tucked away. It's noisy and it's kind of a shared space with sort of walls that don't go up to the ceiling, so you hear what's going on from the other delegations. I just feel that we're irrelevant. I know some good things happen, but New Zealand's got to have a presence here. When countries of a similar size as ours, say Denmark, for example, have very impressive pavilions that draw large crowds because they've got something really interesting to say. The fact that we're not prepared to do that, or successive governments are not prepared to stump up the money to do that, implies to me or shouts at me a real inferiority complex that we don't have anything to tell the world. I think we do. And a very important example of that comes this Sunday evening when Pure Advantage has a major session to unveil its recloaking Papatonuku, i.e. a very big native replanting project. And which is backed by WWF New Zealand. And I think that will attract quite a lot of attention. So New Zealand's, all of New Zealand, there is a lot of business people here, but they're just kind of going around having meetings. And sorry, Zespri is one exception to this because you're involved in that sustainable agricultural program gosh, is it tomorrow? Or later on in COP. But New Zealand business, New Zealand government, New Zealand civil society needs to get its head together and say, actually, we've got something really important we want to say to the world. And it's really important we say it because we're out there making commitments and feeling as though having the confidence to say something. So that's, and this isn't isolated to this COP. That was very much the same in the previous COPs as well. So I think we've got a lot to do to up our game, and we need to see what countries of similar size to us are doing and say, well, yeah, we can do that too.
If I can jump just on that one. Sorry, Laura. Just on of business, I think, we were very grateful for the support of the government that gave us the overflow badges. But I think, for our perspective, it would have been good to have more time to discuss what is it that it's the overall New Zealand message, and what is it that we can do together. And it's something that other governments does in the past. So again, I'm not a New Zealander. In my former job, I was with the Nordics. And so when we were sponsored by the Swedish government, we would have these meetings that we will run from the pre-COPs. So we will know what is in the pre-COP text. So we could advocate the same. And then we work all together. So pre-COP and then Climate Week. And so it was like the series of events, and we were together, like businesses and government, for the same period of time. So it's some reflections that something that can work in the future, be closer aligned.
Can I just follow up briefly on that, because it sounds arcane, but I think it tells us something. There is this amazing system of badges, and so official delegation, civil servants and politicians are the official delegation. But then there's this concept of overflow. You're on the badge saying party overflow, which is people like business and civil society, and that function's been there for many years. But the New Zealand government, as far as I know, has never used that before until this year. Now, there's about 200 people under the New Zealand delegation, of which I think only about 10 are civil servants and politicians. And the other 190 are people like Monica and perhaps Laura. Did you get in on an overflow badge too? Yeah. But the government said, and this is the previous government, oh, well, you can apply for an overflow badge, but if you can get a badge somewhere else, don't try here. And you're going to have to meet all your own expenses, which of course is perfectly reasonable. And you can't possibly say you talk for New Zealand. Well, of course you're not speaking for the government, but you are speaking for New Zealand. And it was just, but anyway, it was the first time we'd ever done an overflow badge. Anyway, sorry, I'll stop. It's a bit arcane.
Now, maybe we'll hop across to some more of the sort of role that business is playing. And we've got a question about what appetite there is among businesses who are attending to lead real change. The asker is asking this in the context of decarbonising transport, logistics and road transport. I know, Monica, you've got an interest in that transportation piece more broadly, and you talked about some of that supply chain piece. So maybe it'd be a good place to start on that level of ambition and where it's focused from business.
Yeah, so for us, of course, like transport is super important. We grow in New Zealand and distribute around 50 countries. So our emissions profile is very heavily on transport. 43% of our profile emissions comes from transport. So we are one of the users that wants to bring about change. But if you look at the whole maritime transport system, we are just tiny. We are this kind of grain of sand. So what we are trying to do here is rally everybody else who is using this transport and to figure out what is it that it needed to complete this. And then you go to all these technical problems from, standards, as Laura mentioned, IMO, the vessels, the fuels, the operators, the infrastructure. So it's a series of chain that you just need to kind of start to get your head around and map it up. That is what we have kind of done. And we have a study about how can we organize a green corridor, because our longest route goes from Tauranga to Zeebrugge, and that's the one that we want to decarbonize. So trying to not try to fix the whole maritime system, but let's start with one thing and let's just map everybody else and start talking to them and figuring out what is it that is stopping, what is it that it's the technology that is there. And some of our partners are saying, we may have the technology, but we want to know what's the real demand. Are you going to be able to sell your fruit in 15 years in Europe? Or are the Europeans going to say, actually, we don't want your fruit from New Zealand anymore because it's too far away? So some of these questions are being difficult, but we just need to kind of map it out and say, well, this is our forecast, this is what we plan. So how can we get more companies like us that are exporting from New Zealand in the same route or similar routes? And then talking to everybody that we can influence to try to get everybody on the table and start discussing these green corridors. So the willingness is there, but it is not easy. It's going to be one of the toughest, I think. And yesterday in the panel of the European Union on shipping decarbonization, where one of the last question was, what do you think we should be talking about in 15 years? And I was just like, please don't say green corridors, because we need to get them right. Not in 15 years, we need it much more sooner. And some of these, they kind of acknowledge that it takes time, but we just need to accelerate it. And I don't think we have their answer now, but that's our ambition now.
Fantastic. I'm going to add a follow-up on that. And I'll take this broader as well, knowing that unfortunately we only have a quarter hour left of our webinar. Do you think, Monica, that you're learning from that process any lessons that you can bring back to both Zespri and other businesses, either on sort of technologies that are available or on how to tackle these kind of hard problems together? Because I'm sure we have plenty of businesses in the audience who also have challenges and maybe can't always come to COP to address them. So what do you think you're learning that you can bring back?
Well, today I'm meeting actually a lot of people on the innovation side. Yesterday, I kind of did a wide range of politicians and talks on different topics. So today is the day and tomorrow where we are talking about innovation. I think it's the connections and to know that there are other people like us looking at the thing that was on nature. Actually, there was a lady from Brazil that they were also looking at investing in nature-based, and they have the similar problems like us. How do we quantify the value of investing in a water catchment now? Because we need to do the investment now, but we are only going to see it in 3-5 years. So how do we do this modeling? And then working with insurances as well. They are a very big player to help us analyze this modeling, this data, and figuring out what are the things that we can present as a case study to our growers to say, this is what we want to achieve. And then again, there's so many other complex problems. So the lady from Brazil was saying, we need to compensate the landowners. And some of them, they are women. So we are actually developing this project where if you are a women landowner, you will get more compensation than the male counterparts to actually balance the equity. And it's a bold move, but it's actually quite tricky to justify it in law. Why are you going to compensate these people more than others for investing in nature? So I think there are significant parallels that I can see with the people that are doing similar efforts than us, and that's what I'm going to bring back to this.
Interesting point on the. Oh, sorry, Roger, go ahead.
No, you go first.
Oh, thank you. It's very, very polite of you. I was just going to say, just on the gender equality and climate has been quite an interesting conversation here, and I know often people don't see there being a link, but I was at an event yesterday with the founder of Women for Women and Daughters for Earth, Zainab Salib, and it was really interesting. She was just talking about how 80% of our small-scale agricultural workers around the world are women, and they are responsible for resource management and traditional knowledge. They're also community organizers, and despite that, less than 1% of philanthropic funds for climate change go to women-led projects around the world, which is kind of mind-blowing to me. And then also women-led businesses, in terms of impact investment for sustainable women-led businesses, it's 2.3%, which is just, I feel like we're kind of like there's a solution there as well, right? And the maths doesn't math. So I think it's just a really interesting point that you made, Monica, about trying to find that equity in terms of the investment. I think is really brilliant.
I just would, the equity issues are fantastically important. So thank you, Laura, for that. And if I may just loop back to one of Monica's point about the sort of people she's meeting. I know lots of us in Aotearoa are already doing this, but I can't emphasize it enough that we seek out people around the world who are working on similar challenges as us, and get to know them and work with them, not just because there's lots to learn, but I think we have lots to contribute to that. And also it's a great help if we feel it's all a bit too claustrophobic in our small country that sometimes feels so a bit disconnected from the rest of the world, to feel part of that global community. So it's about finding your global whānau, if you like, virtually or otherwise. And you don't need to come to COP for that. But if you start building those sorts of relationships, you might find yourself at COP and then have the huge thrill of that experience in person. But that to me is a very essential way of trying to progress these issues, I think.
Yeah, that's a fantastic thing to take away and to bring back, I think, for all of us. I'm going to shift us over a little bit to ask one more meaty question around negotiations that's come through a couple of times. So Aotearoa has signed up to the Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, Resilient Food Systems and Climate Action. And we have a few people wondering, is that going to need a lot of U-turn or a dramatic shift from government on what's happening? Or what are the implications of signing up to that declaration likely to be for New Zealand?
Well, I should let somebody in the primary sector speak first. So, Monica, you are very close to this. That I will sort of drop in a helicopter view after that.
Maybe you can do market signals and so on, Monica,
Yeah,
and we can sweep in after that.
First, and then we do the specifics. I think that's your way around, Rod.
Okay. Look, the declaration, the Emirates Declaration, is a very important one, and again, it gives a really big steer on the direction of travel, but it also acknowledges that in every country of the world, people are at various stages on this. I think that one of the things that worries me most about us in New Zealand, and quite a few in the primary sector, particularly in dairy and the meat sector, is to argue that we're all, as they do, that we're already the best in the world because we have one of the lowest greenhouse gas emissions per kilogram of meat or kilogram of milk solids, which is literally true. And therefore the attitude is, oh, well, it's up to the rest of the world to catch up with us, which completely misses that the world's going off in a different direction. The only way we can feed 8 billion people now, and soon in coming decades, 10 billion people, is to radically rethink land use change, particularly using less land to grow food and produce food in other ways, and a food that is entirely climate compatible, and therefore get to zero emissions and all the rest. And so I'm worried that we're going to be left thinking that we're wonderful and pure and we're magnificent, but we're not measuring the right things. And I was in a session yesterday where a representative from Beef and Lamb was hailed by her fellow panelists and the chair of that session that New Zealand was a real leader on this. And it's true in one sense, because those beef and lamb farmers, by and large, have quite a lot of native forests that they take care of. And in many ways, their land use practices are vastly better than sort of feedlot farmers or grazers in North America. So that's true. But they are chipping away at emissions. But I still think they're missing the very big picture here. And so fantastically important declaration, but our government and our primary sector really have to understand where that direction of travel is going, and to make sure New Zealand's on it, because there are one or two honourable exceptions, and I always use Zespri as the example of that. But apart from that, the people who are really locked onto these issues are few and far between in our primary sector. No, I'll stop.
I mean, I think it's a very important declaration because it shows the importance of the theme. What worries me is that it's overlooking the complexity of the food system, because it's not only about growing the fruit of the food, it's about how it is then distributed. And again, it's part of this ecosystem. One of the big paradoxes that we have is that growing fruit and veg actually doesn't have a lot of carbon impact. But then making sure that this fruit and veg gets to the consumer, in the fresh, the packaging, the impact of the packaging into the supply chain, and what is the impact of that packaging then in the environment, is huge. So I think there is a need that we need to focus on solving these paradoxes of the food system in a more holistic way, and not just saying, okay, we decarbonize agriculture and that's it. So there is like a fundamental need to look at the whole system, and looking at the transport, the packaging, the disposal, what is the infrastructure then at the consumer end, and the food waste. I mean, we are lucky that we don't really have a lot of food waste being a premium product, but other fresh produce actually are in that category. And you don't have to look very far away to see like these countries that are suffering a lot from that. That has very big impacts on the environment. So I think there is a kind of need to go deeper into that declaration and just then draw these kind of roadmaps to figure it out. What are the technicalities and what does that actually mean for us?
Yes, that's absolutely true. But I think it's important to think about what these declarations are, and indeed what the whole UNFCCC, the Framework Convention on Climate Change, is all about. It's about achieving unanimous agreement, which it has to be because it's a UN charter, UN convention, on sort of the guiding principles. And then there's huge work to do below that. And so once you have a declaration in the UNFCCC, you then start to develop this amazing ecosystem of working parties, picking up on various aspects. So you eventually, so you start to operationalize it the way, Monica, that you're suggesting. But these declarations are hugely important because if they set that absolute pivotal point that we need to be thinking of, and in this case on agriculture, is that we have to work with nature, not against it. That applies for everything we do, not just agriculture. And people go, oh, I get it. And then they start the cascade of issues that flow from that they have to work on. So I think these declarations are really important for shifting that mindset. Which brings me back to where we might hopefully get to on fossil fuels over the next week, is that if there is a declaration on the phase out of fossil fuels, that's a radical, radical shift in mindset. We've been talking about this for a long time, but that is that first commitment from which there is this amazing cascade of actions. So as I say, that's how I think it's best to think about these declarations, to embrace the core concept of them, and indeed there's quite a lot of detail there too, but then go off and work on the issues that flow from that.
Thank you. I think that's a fantastic piece to jump off from for what unfortunately is going to have to be our closing piece here, Rod. But taking that idea of the cascade and the ecosystem of action, I'd like to ask each of you to just give us your one closing thought on what you think we all should now be doing as we come up past the midway point of this COP to be part of that ecosystem of action. What do you want people on this webinar to hear and take away and act on from the experiences you've all been having? Do you want to go first, Laura?
Yeah, I'll go first. I would like, if you're a business, to look at the real operational changes that you can make in addition to offsets, if that's what you want to do. And if you're as a consumer or another business, look at things, look at what you're buying. Procurement is a really big one in terms of lowering emissions and scaling green innovation. And, you know, I'm obviously biased, but there's been something that I've found during COP has been an emphasis on transparency and accuracy of reporting. And that is going to become increasingly important for businesses, regardless of your size, particularly if you are wanting to, you know, it's foreseeable that banks will be looking for evidence of that, and your insurers. And I think, you know, looking at something like the EU directive has been a big talking point here on green claims. You know, they're, you know, asking that all green claims will be have to be verified by a government-backed verifier, i.e. an eco-label that takes a science-based approach and is pass-fail, so no tiers or scoring on that front, which I think is particularly important if you're an exporter. So I kind of feel like, from my perspective, probably a little bit selfishly, quite heartened because I feel like the eco-label you know, we've been around for 3 decades, just over 3 decades now, and I feel like we're kind of maybe a little bit ahead of our time, and you know, now we're, you know, I think we're more relevant than ever, so that's been yeah, really heartening for me. So yeah, that's what I would emphasize, is transparency, measuring things accurately and properly, and looking at what you can do. And the whole idea about this is, people often question what they can do as individuals, right? But it's about a ripple effect. So if you do something, talk to someone else. New Zealand isn't too small to make a difference. It absolutely is not.
I think very similar to Laura is look at who is your area of influence. It might be that it's just your neighbor, and if you get him to change a habit, whereas it's, you know, going by public transport to work changes the day of the diet. Whether you are a CEO of a company and can sign up to do the bigger things, invest in nature. So everybody of us can influence someone, and that someone might be somebody very influential. And the other thing I would say is we should not let the climate conversation end at COP. I think we have a lot of months ahead for us, and we should just keep the conversation going. And as Rod said, just translate those commitments into what it means for the real world.
I just hope the three of us have given you a sense that we three have had three very different COPs, because we're pursuing different things in different places, different people at different times. And there's kind of an infinite number of COPs you could have here, depending on who you are and what you do. But there is one thing I hope that we've conveyed to you, is that there is this amazing foment of I'm not sure that's the right word, of energy and idea and ambition, and that anytime you feel that it's all getting a bit too hard, we hope that we've left you with a bit of a sense that it's worth pushing on, but crucially pushing on by sort of reaching out to people. And I think we have a lot to do just within our own communities in New Zealand and within Aotearoa as a whole. I'm not picking on the new government, but that's obviously a place that we need to do a lot of work to encourage them. As I say, I hope that this brief glimpse that the three of us have given you of COP might help you in that.
Thank you, Rod, and thank you all so much for your time and for some really wonderful insights and things to take away. A few people have been asking whether this will be recorded. It will be shared later. So for those who want to come back and pick up on some of those stories or specifics they missed, or re-inspire themselves, you will have the opportunity to do so. Thank you all so much for being with us. A couple of closing notes from me on behalf of SBN as well. I think that call to really take actions and connect with each other is a really timely one. And so we would love to be part of that for anyone who is looking for some support. I look after the Climate Action Programme and the Climate Action Toolbox. So for those looking to make some of those operational changes, this could be one place you can come for inspiration. SBN, of course, is a network, so we would love for you to join us at whatever stage you are in your sustainability journey and be part of that connecting and reaching out. And if you're looking for ways to learn next year, we also have opportunities that you can come to, whether you're right at the beginning or whether you're quite advanced in sustainability. We have a wide suite of offerings, so we would love to be part of keeping that action going and keeping that climate conversation going, because it is so important. And I'm really appreciative, Rod, Laura, and Monica, of the time you've taken to give us a window into COP in all its complexity and all of the fantastic energy that you're seeing. I think this has been a really encouraging conversation. I'm definitely coming away feeling more positive than I had been just from reading the news afar. And I hope that many of our other attendees have had a similar experience. So a massive thank you again to the three of you for sharing your knowledge and your experiences and your time with us, and to all of our attendees for sharing your evening and your fantastic questions. I'm sorry that we couldn't answer nearly all of them, but we will come back to you if we can with additional answers where we weren't able to get to you. And I'm just going to close us now with our closing karakia. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapu nui. Kia wātea, kia mama, te ngākau. Te tinana, te wairua, ki te ara tangata. Koia rā e rongo, ake irihia, ake ki runga. Kia tina, huie, tai kie. A massive thank you again to you all. Have a wonderful evening, and to those on the ground in Dubai, have a fantastic day. Thank you again so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Kimberley. Thanks, everyone.